China, the state reserves the right to censor or even imprison citizens whose speech is deemed to subvert state power or to expose state secrets. Whereas in the United States, the First Amendment stipulates that the state can pass no laws abridging the freedom of religion, freedom of speech or the press, or the right of the people to peaceably assemble and petition the government for a redress of a grievance.
The death of God is about the drying up of a horizon of meaning and of a whole form of human life.
Where do we stand in the illusion it makes? What kind of space are we invited into?
The material relations between people become social relations between things. When we look at toasters, corn, and TVs, we don't see
still, to a large extent, live in the interregnum between worlds, if you will, or between paradigms. Not many people in the history of the world have faced that.
Diet Soap is a Sublation Media podcast. KJ Noh is a journalist, political analyst, writer, and teacher specializing in the geopolitics of the Asia-Pacific region. He's written for Counterpunch, the LA Progressive, and the Asian Times. He is a member of Veterans for Peace and Pivot to Peace. And today we're going to be discussing the conflict between the United States and China and discuss how socialists like ourselves should think about it. So, KJ, do you have anything you would like to add to that bio?
No, I think that's pretty comprehensive. Besides, it's not about me, it's about the topic. So,
okay, great. So, I read one of your pieces. I think it was in the LA Progressive, and you struck me as being very pro-China. And I'm
accused of that. I've been accused of being on the CPC payroll by no less than Ann Garrison and Black Agenda Report. So I take that with a pinch of salt.
Well, let me just say this: if you are on the CCP payroll, make sure you register that payment with the government. You have every right to take that money. And the government right now is behaving as if anytime someone has a foreign backing, they are somehow in league with a foreign power.
Yeah,
and
power registration. Yes, I know. I'm very aware of that. It's happened to many people, not the least of the Uhuru 3.
Right.
Yes, but I regret to say I have not received a red cent from anybody. So,
well, if you figure out a way to receive Chinese money, let me know. I'm open. Russian money, Chinese money, Iranian money. I'll take anybody's money if they want to fund my project. So
I hope you registered or thinking of registering, Doug.
Well, I have not received any money to register yet, but if I do receive some foreign cash, I will register with the government and let them know that I've received cash from overseas and, go through all the proper paperwork so that they can't get me on some technicality, because I just want to reiterate, in the United States, due to the First Amendment, I have the right to say things that somebody from another country wants me to say. And more importantly, the people of the United States have the right to hear that, because there were a Supreme Court decision around a former Soviet Union official coming to the United States back in the 60s, I think it was, where they determined that the public's right to hear protected that person's right to visit the United States and give a lecture. Yeah. So we should not be afraid of these accusations of taking foreign money.
Yes, I agree. Once again, I have never received a red cent for any of my journalism.
Really?
Yes, and that's been a long time. But, this is the thing that I'm afraid of, and perhaps we can touch on this, is I don't know if you remember, during the Bush administration, they said that the Geneva Conventions were quaint, right? And I have a feeling that there are a lot of people among the ruling class who think that the First Amendment is quaint, and we see the hammer coming down very, very hard on activists. So,
yes, I know. And who's the one? Yeah. The people who are most outspoken about that right now, saying that the First Amendment should be shelved, thrown in the dustbin of history. It's the Democrats. It's Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, and recently John Kerry directly said that the First Amendment was a block to proper governance and that something needed to be done about it. So they have not done it yet. And so we should behave as though we still have that right, those rights, I think.
Yes.
All right. So having set it up that way, neither one of us are, operating as advocates for some foreign enemy, unfortunately.
But do you have any red clothing in your house? Do you have a Che Guevara poster on your bedroom?
I have a red shirt with Mickey Mouse's profile, and it says Super Dad or something like that on it. So, okay. But it is red. I don't have a Che Guevara poster. I don't have any Soviet art. I do have Picasso's Guernica on the wall. I don't know if that's
he was a communist. Yeah, he was a communist through and through. So I think you're halfway in trouble there.
Okay, well, when they come to collect my reproduction of Picasso, I will, I'll stream it live on YouTube. That will be my goal.
That will be your final swan song podcast. That will be great.
Yeah, that's right. I can't wait to be dragged away on camera. So, all right. So let's start with these questions I sent you before we. The first one is, you claimed in a recent piece, and I think it was the LA Progressive, that we are seeing the collapse of 500 years of Western civilization. And then you said that the Chinese rise, the undeniable success of the Chinese state over the last 20 years demonstrates that collapse. But if you believe that China is communist, wouldn't the rise of China represent the fulfillment of the Enlightenment and the fulfillment of the promise of 1848, which was the European, revolutions for bourgeois rights?
That's such a complex question, and I'm probably not going to do a good job with it, but let me just give you my general thoughts. First, okay. I think that we can go back to Zhou Enlai, the premier. This goes back, several decades. There was a journalist who was asking him a question. What do you think of, 1968, May 1968? Is it a revolutionary moment? And he didn't answer. He was just very, very silent. And so the journalist said, maybe I need to warm him up. Maybe I need to kind of, start with something easier. So he said, what do you think of the revolution of 1917? And Zhou Enlai still didn't say anything. He just looked very, very pensive. And so finally the journalist said, I need to really throw him a softball, a marshmallow, just to get the ball rolling. And he said, Premier, what do you think of the revolutions of 1848? And Zhou Enlai, again, he thinks for a long time. And then he says, it's too early to tell. Okay. So I think, that's a valid point. It is too early to tell, but just from the, the rapid, cursory sketch, what happened after 1948? 4 years later, we had Louis Napoleon as emperor for life, right? And then we saw all of the countries, perhaps maybe one exception would be Finland, but almost all the other countries, all their revolutions failed. And then you saw France go on this massive colonial rampage in Africa and in Southeast Asia. So, was it the fulfillment or the promise? I mean, what promise are we talking about, and what was the fulfillment of the Enlightenment? I think the key thing to highlight is, China is its own thing. It doesn't fit into Western categories. There was that neocon hawk, Kyron Skinner, and she said that, China, we're having difficulty with China because it doesn't fit into the largest stream of Western enlightenment. Even when we're on bad terms with the Soviet Union, the Soviet Union was still Marxist, which meant that it was part of the Western Enlightenment tradition, and China is something completely different, right? So, some very, very, interesting Orientalist observations. But I think it's fair to say that China is its own thing. It's developing on its own terms. And what we choose to ascribe to it, or how we choose to describe it, I think at the end of the day is immaterial for the Chinese themselves. They are showing, at the very least, that you can modernize without becoming westernized. And you can modernize without going into neoliberal capitalism. And I think those are important developments. And what they do, I was shaking my head a little moment ago when you said that essentially what I was saying is that China is opening up the possibility for other countries, the global South, to resist imperial Western hegemony. And on that level, I think it is very, very important. And then, the last thing I will say, perhaps a little bit abstruse, is that, there are some people, if you go around the world, there's some people who think that pizza is American. Now, it is true that what the modern thing that we eat called pizza is really an American invention. But we do have to remember that, pizza does have an origin in, Sicilian peasant food, from Italy. And it's the same thing for the Enlightenment itself. To the extent that we valorize or talk about some of the important ideals of the Enlightenment, I would argue that there is, I think that you could make the case that some of the ideals of the Enlightenment actually come from China. Certainly, this kind of system that is built on rationality and meritocracy. These were some of the imports from China by the Jesuits to the West. And this is why you have the Grandes Écoles in France, or the US civil service exam. Before that, the Western system was monarchical or aristocratic. And it was the Chinese notion that you let the best people rule, that you actually have an inclusive meritocratic society. That was China's great contribution to the ideals of the Western Enlightenment. I'm not going to talk about the actual practical consequences because I think those are pretty corrupt. But I certainly think that China's system, as imported and as analyzed by, the Enlightenment thinkers, at the time, Rousseau, Voltaire, etc., I think they were very, very much in favor of adopting Chinese ideals into the, the Western Enlightenment.
Okay, so let's say that Rousseau was influenced by Chinese ideas, all the better, right? From my perspective, I don't think that Rousseau was advocating for a meritocracy. He was a critic of society in the 18th century. And so what I see him as doing is bringing forward the notion that that society, not some divine authority, not some violent state, but the people themselves were capable and already creating their own conditions and through the general will of the people. And the task I see after Rousseau is to reflect, to create enough self-reflection in society for society to take up the task and responsibility of creating its own future. And from my perspective, that's what socialism is about. So it does spring out of Rousseau or Locke or any of the Enlightenment era philosophers and thinkers. I stand with Kant when it comes to overcoming our immaturity and thinking for ourselves independently as individuals, but also as society. So I guess my question for you would be, if China is so different than other forms of modernity that spring out of the Enlightenment, what marks that difference? And does it come down to a cultural difference or a racial difference? Why, or just a difference because of the history that is behind China? How would you, and what would you want to deny to Chinese people that Rousseau might want to give to the West?
The Chinese have always been extraordinarily syncretic and also pragmatic in their approach to society. And so I don't think there's anything that they would outright deny, but I think there's much that they would consider. And it is an ongoing project. The Chinese are dialectical thinkers. They're dialecticians, before Hegel, right? I mean, it goes to the core of Chinese philosophy, which is Taoism. So I think that I don't think there's anything they would deny, but, just kind of touching back, because you put out a lot of very, very important thinkers. Let's, think back to, one of the key Enlightenment thinkers, Descartes, right? Let's think about the cogito, right?
He's my favorite, one of my absolute favorites. So Great. Let's talk about Descartes.
Yeah. So, one of the key insights of Descartes is his radical skepticism, right? You are not going to take anything as given. You approach everything with skepticism. And therefore, he goes on this kind of internal analysis. What is it, if you doubt everything, what is it that you cannot doubt, right? And we all know the answer, right?
Doubt itself. The fact that you are doubting. Or I think, therefore I am, which also you could say I doubt, therefore I am.
Right. So you cannot doubt the fact that you are doubting, I think, therefore I am. That's the, little slogan that we are given. But from that, okay, so you've established that you are thinking, and perhaps you could even go further and say that you establish yourself as a thinking being, that you already established being. But that doesn't give you the world. How do you reconnect Descartes to the world that we inhabit?
Right. So
the answer there is a theological answer, right? You need God. That's what Descartes uses.
That doesn't work. Philosophically,
I agree it doesn't work, but that's what Descartes does, right? And this is the point that I'm trying to make. Chinese have been a secular society for millennia. They don't need God in order to establish their state or their legitimacy. I mean, they have a generalized notion of heaven, the mandate of heaven. But ultimately, as I said, once again, the Chinese are pragmatic and very, very syncretic. And so China simply does things its own way. It's not going to fit into Western categories. It doesn't follow Western scripts and prescriptions. And it is characterized by syncretism, pragmatism, and I would also argue dialectics and inclusion. In fact, they invented the notion of tolerance and inclusion as a philosophical concept. So, but the thing is, the Western Enlightenment still needed, at its foundational level, it needed Descartes, and Descartes needed God. And so what you have is really something built on a monotheism influence culture. You have this, kind of totalizing meta-narrative, a messianic worldview, which is why the Enlightenment results in massive colonization. And the Chinese, they have never bought into this kind of single messianic orthodoxy. They've always been syncretic, pragmatic, and inclusive. Let me give you just one example.
Mm-hmm.
Think about the Jews all around the world, the Jewish diaspora.
Mm-hmm.
There's been one place on the planet for over 1,000 years in which they have never been persecuted. Do you know what that country is?
I'm going to take a wild guess. I'm going to say China.
It's China. Yes.
Right.
So probably around the 7th or 8th century, Persian Jews started to trade with China, and then they started to settle. And then around the 9th or 10th century, they were allowed to establish their communities. And when they did that, the emperor met with them, and he kind of, it was kind of this formal, interview, if you will. And he gave them some advice. And he said, you are welcome to stay in the celestial kingdom, China, under one condition: that you maintain and that you respect the rituals and the traditions of your elders. If you can do that, you are welcome to stay. In other words, he's saying, if you can remain Jewish, you can stay in our country. That's the kind of syncretic worldview that the Chinese had. It's this kind of inclusive, open-minded, syncretic worldview, which is why you had Islam and Judaism and Confucianism and Taoism, and all of these things were coexisting under a secular Confucian government. And I think that is a very, very kind of powerful message and a powerful historical example. And I think that's something that the West really doesn't understand. So then, I'm sorry, I'm talking in circles here, but I think that you also have to understand the Chinese adoption of Marxism in that way. So they essentially took it, adapted to local conditions in the historical moment. It's infused with Taoism and Moism and some Confucianism. And of course, this was a scandal for Western Orthodox Marxists at the time, peasant communist revolution, what impossible, right? But since then, there have been multiple transformations, adaptations, experiments in their socialism, including the introduction of market forces. And, China has a long history of market commerce. Again, this goes back at least to the 10th century. And, people who are well-versed in this, I'm not an expert, but people who are well-versed in this would say that it is about building up the productive forces to make socialism possible in the future. So China is not socialist, but it is a proto-socialist state. It's striving to become a moderately prosperous socialist state in a few decades. They have a timeline by 2049, and so it's moving that way. So that's how I see it. I'm sure there are counter arguments, but that's my kind of very general view.
Well, I want to say two things. First of all, about Descartes.
Mm-hmm.
I studied philosophy in college way back in the 90s, and then as I've run this podcast and also both Zero Books and now Sublation Media, I have read philosophy books with listeners and patrons, and we're right now reading The Science of Logic, which is Hegel, and there's a good portion of The Science of Logic, and we're at the beginning still, but where he discusses Descartes, and the way in which Descartes fails. I mean, the argument, the ontological argument for God, which he uses, I don't think holds up. Does leave.
There are no ontological arguments that that hold, right? In fact,
right.
None of the arguments for God, really work from a logical standpoint.
Yeah, I haven't encountered one that does. But what I would say about what Hegel does is demonstrate that the claim "I think, therefore I am" collapses down into thought is, and that is where he begins with the Science of Logic, with the notion of being, and then a dialectical examination of being. But the point here is that to claim that the modern bourgeois tradition that, we can starts with, let's say Descartes and goes into the German idealists and moves through what's called a Western tradition, but which you pointed out was influenced by Chinese thought.
Some of it, yes.
And I know was also influenced by Islamic thought. I would just really call it world philosophy. But in any case, the philosophical tradition has to move is itself moving dialectically through with some regressions and problems along the way, trying to wrestle with the freedom that emerges through something like Descartes' attempt to doubt everything given, or the freedom that a philosopher like Kant tries to develop in his thought and
across the cunning of history, right? If we're talking about Hegel.
Yeah, and this is historically developed, but it's not determined. It's not like it's some great power like God has set it all out in advance, but rather our own activity sets the course of it. So, but to go to the way in which China is fundamentally different. I mean, the ways in which you describe China, syncretic, pragmatic, these things seem to me to be quite easily applied to the United States. I mean, in our self-definition, America is like, the cliches are it's a melting pot, and the Americans have a can-do mentality. They don't get bogged down in intellectual puzzles, but are practical people, pragmatic. American pragmatism.
And they're also a big difference. They're also genocidal, right?
I don't know if that makes them different.
I think
I would. My understanding is that genocide is pretty much part of the human story altogether. But
I disagree.
But also,
I think it's unique to settler colonial expansion.
Okay, I mean, I don't. I mean, but just leave it there. I don't think it's unique to settler colonial expansion. I also wouldn't think of as a Marxist, I would think about the way in which the economic development and the demands of this contradictory form of freedom known as capitalism, that those demands make, the way that that form of freedom makes demands on the society and constrains society is what sets up oppositions in the world and between the classes. So if you are aiming at socialism, the question is, how are you going to overcome the contradictions that capitalism imposes on you? What's the strategy for doing that? And I don't think you can say, well, we'll overcome it because we're Chinese, or we'll overcome it because we're American, or we'll overcome it because we've got this great French character that's spotless and hasn't done anything.
What I'm saying, right?
Right, but no, it is. I mean, I think it is.
Careful. You're saying we will. I'm not Chinese. Okay, so I'm not going to say that I'm Chinese or that I'm
not French either, right? And I'm not Chinese.
But you are European, right?
Yeah, but I'm not claiming that I would be able to overcome the contradictions of capitalism based on my Europeanness.
I don't think any of us can. I think that capitalism, I don't think in the West, I don't think there's much challenge to capitalism going on. I mean, I think that's an honest assessment to make.
Well, why is that the case, do you think?
Once again, these are really great questions, very complex questions. I think that the working class no longer has the power and the solidarity to be able to institute a revolutionary process. I think that has to do with many, many different things, but I also think it has to do with some of the ways in which Marxism has been misappropriated, diluted, individualized, culturalized, etc. I think those are all factors, and it's a long, complex discussion. But I don't see, transformation taking place in the industrial core. I think the possibilities lie in the global South. It's just my,
Well, let's talk about that. I mean, a little bit, because when we started this conversation, we just started with a conversation about the First Amendment and how if we're in America, we have the right of the First Amendment.
We
that's
don't.
Something that
we don't. It's just a mythology.
Well, we do and we don't. I mean, we do because right now there is a Supreme Court case being heard where there's a Supreme Court case being heard where some scientists and journalists and one of the presidential candidates, RFK Jr., is challenging the Biden administration's suppression of speech over the last 4 years. And that court is tasked with upholding the Constitution and may very well turn out a result where the Biden administration will be constrained by the First Amendment. So,
did they constrain the Biden administration over Julian Assange?
There was no First Amendment case taken to the Supreme Court over Julian Assange. So that would have been
because he wasn't brought to the United States, right? But from the standpoint of most of the people, they didn't even think it was possible, and it wasn't even clear if he would be able to argue a First Amendment right.
Well, no, he would have been able to argue a First Amendment right, or
I don't think it was clear, and I think they didn't want to take the risk. That's why they were trying to hold out as long as possible in the UK.
Well, I think there certainly is an argument to be made that the First Amendment applied to Julian Assange because it applies to anyone
in the
who's communicating in the United States.
In the abstract.
And so, well, in the abstract, but also I think you can make a legal argument for it.
But the problem is that these rights are always abstract. When push comes to shove, they're always suppressed. And
they're not always abstract. Sometimes they're put into political battle. Sometimes they're fought for. And in the case of RFK Jr. and the journalists are taking this case to the Supreme Court, it's being fought for. But also in the case of the Uhuru movement, that it was fought for there as well. And working class people in the United States.
What was the outcome of the Uhuru movement?
They were not convicted.
What was the full outcome?
That's all. Well, you tell me. What was the outcome? I only followed up to the point to know that they did not receive a conviction, that it was dismissed.
No, they're still appealing it, right? They're still appealing the decision. They were not found to be foreign agents because that's such a stretch. But they were still convicted of one of the charges, so it's not an acquittal.
Well, what was the charge?
Why don't you look it up?
I'll look it up right now. Yeah. So here it goes. Okay. So the conspiracy charges carry up to 5 years in prison. No sentencing date has been set. All four of those convicted or were affiliated with the African People's Socialist Party, which has locations in Florida. So what was the conviction on? They were convicted of conspiring to act as unregistered Russian agents.
Conspiring to act, right? They were not found as Russian agents, but they were convicted of conspiring to act. That seems like an extraordinary judgment, in my opinion.
It is. It's absolutely ridiculous.
Absolutely.
And
so that shows you how it works, right? They will throw something at you until something sticks. And that's simply how the federal government works. It has a 99.
I would be willing to bet, though, that given that they were not found to be Russian agents, and that the fact that they have the right of appeal, this conspiring to act as unregistered Russian agents conviction, probably I would not bet that it will hold. But here's the thing. Here's the thing.
Been upheld. It should have been thrown out from the beginning.
I totally agree. But here's the thing. Because of the First Amendment and the constitutional order we have in the United States, they have the right of appeal. they can make reference to the First Amendment, and while hold on, while the trial itself and just the charges themselves are an abuse, right, of the state, nonetheless, they are better off, and we are better off having those rights in the United States than not having them. And when working class people take up those rights and insist upon them being enforced and respected, they will be much more powerful due to those formal rights than they would have been without them.
How much experience have you had with the judicial system?
A bit.
A bit? Can you say a little bit more?
No, I can't talk about my experience with the judicial system, but I can just say that I've had some experience with it.
Was it, can you say whether it was the criminal or whether it was, civil?
I have not been charged with any crimes, no.
Okay, so it was civil. It was a civil suit, perhaps. Okay. Now, here's the problem with the criminal part of the system is that, for example, the federal courts, they win, and they win on an overwhelming scale. If you actually look at the statistics, most of the charges are plea bargained, or, defendants enter a plea. And so it's something like 99.92 or 99.97% of the cases the government wins. And it's extraordinary. I mean, people try and massage that statistic into something much, much less. But the fact is that once you're caught in that machine, it essentially steamrollers you. It throws,
as a fragmented individual, if you're caught up in the federal judiciary, you're probably going to be advised most of the time by your lawyer to cop a plea, because it will be better for you to cop a plea than it will be to try to pursue it all the way to the end. But my point is not about individuals who happen to get caught up in the federal justice system,
but who else
rather about the working class in the United States and the power that they potentially have, and the power that they potentially have as working class people in the United States.
The working class does not
due to those rights.
Only individuals are, right?
When working class people organize together and form their own institutions, then they can have the material basis to stand up for their rights as individuals as well. So they'll be able to have working class networks of support in the legal system. They'll have working class networks of support on a variety of levels. But we have to build those kinds of institutions.
If you believe in separation of powers, right?
Yeah, I do.
Which is that's one of the things is supposedly enlightenment. But is it truly? Do we truly have separation of powers? And once again, I'll come back to the notion that the courts are highly, I think there's an ideal that the courts are some way of rendering justice. But, if you go to court, I'm
not arguing that this bourgeois justice is the ultimate form of justice. What I'm arguing is a practical thing in a syncretic way that because the American working class has this limited formal set of rights, they're in a better position to organize politically and to challenge capitalism than any set of workers anywhere in the world who don't have those rights, where the state would not be so constrained.
What has been the outcome of that?
Well, it depends on where you want to point. But if I would not say that the outcome, I would say that on its own, those rights will not do the work of politically organizing for socialism for us. But rather, we should take advantage of those rights. And then I'll go on to say, in China, my understanding is that there's nothing quite like the First Amendment protecting the rights of speech of everyday workers in China. And that if they tried to organize politically against capital as it currently exists, despite the aims of overcoming it down the road by the state rather than the people, if they were to try to organize politically, they would be smashed without any recourse or niceties.
Not really.
So they do have a First Amendment as individuals, and they do have a right to speak. That's anywhere near the same level as that we have in the United States.
Well, first, the laws under capitalism are full of abstractions, but in their concrete manifestation and exercise, they turn out to be very, very illusory. I mean, all you have to do is look at what happens in the courts. As I said, once again, I don't think we can overemphasize this. If you go into a court system, most likely you as an individual, you're going to lose for the same reason that when you go to Las Vegas and you go into a gambling house, you're going to lose. Now you say, oh, I could win, I might win. And yes, from time to time you win, but ultimately it's set up for you to lose, because that is the setup. The structure is set up for you to lose. And even if you had equal odds, which you don't, you never have equal odds, but even if you had equal odds, they have something which you don't have, which is they can outlast you. They can continue and continue and continue. And at a certain point, the Uhuru 3 or Julian Assange or anybody else, they're going to reach a point in which they are exhausted and they will cop a plea, as, for example, did Julian Assange. So let's not, kind of succumb to the illusion that somehow this very, very illusory system of capitalist justice is something that we can leverage for the transformation of society. It doesn't happen both in the concrete and in the actual historical record. It doesn't happen. It's the wrong appeal. Now, just going back to China.
Well, let's talk about Eugene Debs for a moment. When he was jailed on the First and his First Amendment rights were violated, and he went to jail. That had such a profound impact on his base and on the socialists and working class in America that over time the state had to give. So when you have a working class movement that's organized around these basic civil liberties and are aware of them as their own rights, and those rights are violated, that gives you a position to fight back when you're organized. So the Socialist Party of America did stand up for the First Amendment rights. And while they didn't take power and they were defeated, they weren't defeated because they relied too heavily on trying to struggle for their free speech. There were other political factors that suppressed the Socialist Party of America.
Those additional factors are not extraneous, right? They're very, very important. And I don't believe in separating them from the system. I don't think you take the courts just in isolation. You understand the courts as part of that system.
Well, I would say that the Socialist Party of America was defeated due to the failures, not in the American courts, but due to the failures that occurred in Europe and the Soviet Union. That the difficulty became that the communists overall formed a popular front with the so-called progressive capitalists around the world, and this led to the suppression. I mean, I'm sort of reversing the order here in the timeline, but the point is the degree to which the progressive capitalists could outplay the socialists and suppress the socialists, the degree to which they could be led away from socialist struggle into support for the capitalist state, into support for the right set of policies from the people with guns. That's the degree to which the Socialist Party lost. So in the 19th century, it was a defeat by diverting the power of the socialists and populists into the Democratic Party. In the 20th century, it was the way Stalinism arose, and the Popular Front arose out of that. But in all those cases, when the working class starts to allow the capitalist class to do its thinking for it and to be the subject of history, to be the ones that's going to deliver socialism to the world, that's when the socialist movement fails. Whether it's in China or the United States or Canada or Africa, that's always going to lead to failure. I'm not saying it's always a mistake that's made, but that's always going to lead to failure.
Okay. So, coming back to the original question, and I think we've gotten a little bit diverted, but this is a very rich conversation, so I appreciate it. I mean, I will make the argument that China is doing its own things, and it's doing very suspicious things from the standpoint of a capitalist economy. I mean, it does things that it doesn't resemble anything. Many things don't resemble what capitalists would acknowledge as capitalism. That's why you hear the hawks, going off about China being Marxist, blah, blah, blah. But here's the question. Do you know of any capitalist society that does long-term, and I'm talking long-term planned economic development for the common good, and which is not moving or already a financialized rentier economy, which all capitalist economies trend towards, and that has public ownership of all land, of all infrastructure, of 60% of corporations, and which has recession-free economic development, and has the virtual elimination of poverty, hunger, and illiteracy, and a commitment to ecological sustainable development written into its constitution, and which developed with no primitive accumulation, no slavery, no colonization, invasions, war, and which is focused on creating public wealth infrastructure and sharing it with the global South to develop them rather than to underdevelop them, and a scientific approach to development itself, what we call trial spots. Do you know of any capitalist society that does those things?
Yeah, I know of at least one. That would be China. But here's the thing. I think you presented a kind of overly glowing picture. But I do admit that China lifted people out of poverty. I don't believe that they've eliminated inequality.
I just said that China is different because of those things, and you don't get to say, "Oh, I know of one capitalist country that's trying."
I can say that, and I can back it up. I can back it up as well. First of all, capitalism has an internal contradiction in it, which you can make steps forward. It always ends up creating situations where you take steps back.
Capital works by failing. Capital works by failing.
I would accept. I would expect, just as the United States after World War II, and it had a massive boom where there was a massive lifting up of the people out of poverty, and there was a sense that, as even socialists at the time and Marxists at the time thought, maybe we're in a post-capitalist. Hold on, maybe we're in a post-capitalist society now because the administrative state has managed this contradiction so perfectly, offered consumerism up as and as a replacement for freedom, and that we may be stuck in this post-capitalist administrated society forever because it will meet the needs of the people. That was what Horkheimer and Adorno thought after World War II.
You mean just the CIA Marxists, right? You're giving me CIA Marxists?
I'm giving you the Marxists who joined the OSS to fight the Nazis.
Oh,
yes.
Come on. I mean, anti-Stalinists.
That's what. Okay, yes, anti-Stalinist, absolutely, right, anti-Stalinist.
Right.
I'm also anti-Stalinist, right? I'm not pro-Stalin, so I'm not going to turn around and embrace the Stalinist state. When even Stalin himself said, without revolutions in the developed world, we will not be able to hold on to the socialism in the Soviet Union, but will degenerate.
You asked the question earlier why there was no revolutionary subject in the global North, or some question like that, and I think the Frankfurt School is one of the reasons for that. I'll be honest, I think so.
Okay. Well, what I was quoting, you could also turn to Paul Burnham, or I think it was Paul Burnham. You turn to Burnham or any number of other mid-20th century thinkers, both socialists and not, who thought that we were in a post-capitalist time. But the point, my point would be, is that state capitalism is a form of capitalism. That doesn't mean that revolutionary struggles shouldn't go through a state capitalist period or can avoid doing that necessarily. I hope, as a kind of ultra leftist, I hope it can be very brief. But the key here is that you have to escape the wage relation and the class basis of society if you're truly to go overcome capitalism and create conditions of socialism, which, you can say, okay, well, we'll do that in 20 years, 25 years. And actually, they're not even saying that. What they're saying is there'll be the beginnings of the dictatorship of the proletariat in 25 years, not that there'll be communism in 25 years. But nonetheless, you can make those claims. But for me, it always goes back to, is the working class itself living under the conditions necessary where they can organize independently for their own emancipation? Or is the state running society? In the United States, the current progressive administrative state, which is sometimes, very often, the neoliberal state, is suppressing the workers' right to organize and down to the ideological level. I would just charge people like yourself as aiding and abetting that suppression of the ideology of freedom that needs to be taken up by working class people if we're going to organize for actual socialism, whether it's going to be in China or the United States. I don't know where the working class is going to get it together first, but I'm just saying we cannot rely on any state to bring us, any capitalist state, to deliver socialism to the workers on a silver platter. That's just not going to happen.
Okay. So, that's a really important question. And I think it's a very complex one. I don't know if we'll be able to resolve that in our short dialogue. But let me ask you a question. Do you believe in public goods? Like, say, for example, single-payer healthcare?
I believe that single-payer healthcare is a good thing if you're stuck within a capitalist system. It probably is better than the other forms of healthcare, but it really depends on the overall economic situation in the world rather than what the formal system is. So, for instance, if you have single-payer healthcare, but the state is going broke, you may find it very, very difficult to find adequate healthcare, and they may block your attempts to get healthcare because they're so broke. Whereas, on the other hand, if you happen to be living through a boom period and a total free market economy where you have to pay for everything yourself, and and you happen to be working during a time when there's something close to full employment, it might be better not to have the state run the healthcare system. That's a question of the particularity of the moment in terms of the interests of everyday people, and it's not like an ideological point where, oh yes, it's better to have the state run our healthcare rather than the private capitalists. There's no difference, from my way of thinking, between the private capitalists and the capitalists that have concentrated into the state. So I don't think there's a moral difference between the two. I happen to think right now it would be better for working class people in the United States to have a public option, or even better, nationalized medicine or socialized medicine in the United States. But I don't think that would, if it was achieved, that would be a permanent victory, because, as capitalism is always going into a crisis and operates through failure, and is a class system where the primary aim is always to recreate the working class, to always recreate that class system.
Well, capitalism, it works only by failing. And I will argue that China is not failing, okay, unless you want to subscribe to the Gordon Chang theory of China, which every year, along with economists, every year they claim that China is failing. It's going to fail the next year. So there's this constant collapsist doctrine that actually goes back to the Clintons, right? They believe that China would fail. And it's only in 2008, when the entire capitalist financial system failed, but China didn't, that the US started to prepare for kinetic war against China. This is what we call the pivot to Asia, and attached to that was something called air-sea battle, which was a literal doctrine of war against China, which we're seeing being worked out currently along the island chain.
I just don't think you can separate out nations when you're talking about a world capitalist economy. So there are winners and losers in the world capitalist. Hold on. Let me get.
Countries are important. I believe that states exist.
Yeah, but you can't separate out the overall any given state that's working within the world capitalist system from the world capitalist system overall. So I hold with the notion that capitalism sets up something called the declining tendency towards the rate of profit to decline. Yes. That will have its way with China, just as it would with any other capitalist state. You can mitigate it, you can moderate it, you can
if it's capitalist. Try to manage. If it's capitalist,
and it is by its own admission, it's capitalist. By its own admission, it's capitalist because it's not claiming to have achieved socialism. Capitalism has to do with the mode of production in society and whether or not labor confers value to the commodities.
That's your definition.
That's the Marxist definition, right?
Okay. Let me ask you. Do you monetize this show?
Yeah.
Okay. Does it generate enough revenue for you to sustain yourself, to reproduce yourself?
Yeah.
Really? I'm very impressed. Wow. So with this show, that's all you need to reproduce, sustain yourself and your family.
Yeah, and we're also trying to hire on more people. Yes.
Okay. So when you hire on those people, is it going to be a co-op?
No.
So you are the capitalist.
I'm a capitalist, absolutely. In terms of what I'm doing on the show, I'm a capitalist. But and I would not claim that my show will deliver socialism. I would not claim that
that question I'm asking you is, do you consider yourself a Marxist?
Yeah.
So you're a capitalist and you're a Marxist.
Yes, in the same way that someone living in China who's aiming at getting to socialism through capitalism is a Marxist and a capitalist. The question is
a striving to Marxism, and that it is using capitalism, and it has capitalists, right?
Right. The question is, what is the working class in China organizing itself, and does it have the freedom to organize politically separately from the state or not? I am not controlling the people who listen to the show, and I'm hoping working class people will organize politically. In fact, it's one of the things that I'm really advocating for, is that the American working class and the world working class organize for political independence from the current capitalist states. Not because I think that those workers are going to be suddenly outside of the capitalist system. They're not. In fact, it's the workers who reproduce capitalism the most. They're the ones who are most necessary to reproduce capitalism in capitalist conditions. I just happen to think that when the workers organize politically to protect their interests, they will come up against the limits of capitalism much more directly and be in a position to overcome them, whereas any set of petty bourgeois intellectuals who happen to work within the state will never be in the position to do that.
Okay. So you're doing very important work educating people and teaching them, very important critical concepts. My background is a little bit different. I'm from Korea. I'm from the third world. And during the period that I was growing up, there was a very, very robust discussion. And the discussion we characterized the discussion between NL and PD. PD was called People's Democracy, and NL was National Liberation. And thousands of students and workers threw themselves into fighting for PD, for People's Democracy. It was extraordinary movement, students going to factories, organizing, creating mass shutdown strikes, et cetera, et cetera. And it amounted to nothing. And South Korea is a neoliberal state, and it is firmly grabbed, by the short hairs, by U.S. capital. The NL line was that we need to seek national liberation from imperialism, that you are not going to have even, an outside chance at building a workers' democracy without freeing yourself from U.S. imperialism. So that debate raged, and thousands of people were thrown into that meat grinder at tremendous cost. And the NL line has shown to be the right analysis. And it wasn't an abstract analysis. It was a real analysis. People voted with their bodies, and it was tested on the battlefield. And so I think it goes back to, this notion, sorry to get Maoist on you, but primary versus secondary contradiction, right? The primary contradiction is US imperialism. If you understand it from that standpoint, and that's my lived experience, then you have a very, very different analysis, a very, very different approach than from what you are advocating within the imperial core, where you're trying to organize, the workers, which, for the Fordist period were kind of a labor aristocracy. And now with neoliberalism, those benefits have been taken away. And you have this, massive funneling of wealth upwards. And so having given away their agency, we're at a loss to understand it. And, the kind of Frankfurt School analysis really doesn't help you. You really have to get back to the material basics. But coming back to the question about China, if you look at the American worker from 1974, wages have essentially flatlined, right? If you do the adjustment for inflation, their wages have flatlined. Instead, they're just taking out more debt, which is typical, the financialization of the system, and they've been working harder, and they've been working multiple jobs, and the entire family is working, the teenagers are working, the wife is working, grandfather is working, nobody's retiring anymore. And you just see this kind of fracking of human labor, because that's the direction in which we're in. And we see this massive financialization, right? And so, coming back to the notion of public goods or a single payer, I mean, a single payer is simply a state monopoly on an industry, right? It's state monopoly. So we can understand that as part of the movement that needs to happen, as opposed to, say, a monopoly by Amazon or by, a Sutter or whatever, right? Those are very, very different things. But coming back again to the conditions of the worker, since the 1970s, workers' wages have flatlined. And here's another really important statistic. The life expectancy of the US citizen has actually diminished, right? It's gone down by about 2 years or something like that. I mean, these are very, very important signs. We cannot ignore them. And during the same period, you see China, the life expectancy increasing by decades. And you see that the workers have improved their condition. And say, for example, from 1980 to the current moment, their salaries have increased eightfold. They're seeing a concrete improvement in the conditions of their lives. And get this, think about this. In China has the longest post-retirement life expectancy. That is, it's about 18 years or 18 to 20 years for men and up to 35 years for women. That's 35 years in which you are outside of the constraints of the workplace, which is and the workplace as an oppressive relationship. That's 35 years of freedom that you have, healthy freedom that you have. In the US, what is the post-retirement life expectancy? It's very, very little. I mean, who can afford to retire anymore, right? I mean, it is completely different. So you can see that there are qualitative differences. Let me give you one more. Can
I interject on this? Because I want to say something in response to what you just said. You've put me in this strange position because I actually disagree with some of what you just said, but not for the reasons that might appear on the surface. Like I hate this moment where like we're comparing the brochures from one capitalist nation to another, or one class society. Right? Hold on,
yeah,
one class society, one class society versus another. In the United States, it isn't really the case that the wages as a share of GDP have flatlined. What's happening in the United States is that there's been a massive stratification in the working class. So there's an unequal divvying up of wages across the working class in the United States.
That's true in all capitalist societies. Right. Agreed. And what about purchasing power parity? Has that improved?
Well, again, if you're talking about the reason why you want to make these distinctions is if you are talking about purchasing power of the working class as a block, it has gone up, not pretty much equal to the increase in profits. The reason why this is something that I used to argue about and have since around 2008, because the people who would make this argument that the problem was that the workers' wages had been suppressed were always advocating for some sort of Keynesian redistributionist approach to state policy. Whereas what I would point out is that in fact the problem runs deeper, that the problems of the U.S. capitalist state and U.S. capitalist society overall in this period are being passed down to the working class. But it is not the case that they're simply being cheated, or that there's plenty of money and they could all get a higher wage. The reality was that there was a crisis of profitability that expressed itself through the housing market. So, yes,
it wasn't a crisis. It's an ongoing crisis. I mean, I hope that we can agree that capitalism.
Well, sure, it's an ongoing tendency for the rate of profit to decline, and there's never really equality or full employment. But there are also moments of real crisis for the capitalists themselves, where lots of corporations go out of business, the banks fail, that kind of thing, and those come from the internal.
Yeah, but I don't judge the crisis from the viewpoint of the corporations and capitalists. I judge the crisis from the viewpoint of the people, of the working class. And
the working class do judge it that way, because when their corporation goes under, they lose their job. When they can't go to the bank to take out the money from the bank because it's failed, they can't pay for their groceries. So the workers themselves feel the crisis when it's intensified, as an intensified.
They feel it more. Yeah. So what is chronic becomes acute. But let's not deny that it's chronic, right?
Well, I'm not denying it's chronic, but the point is that it wasn't being expressed. It wasn't caused by a suppression of wages, and it wasn't being and the problems within capitalist society could not be solved by having a better set of old style New Deal Democrats in power in the United States.
I would never argue that. That's not what I'm doing. Certainly, I'm not a Keynesian. The piece that I didn't get to complete, but which I think is important, is not only did wages flatline for the working class, but what we also saw.
They actually didn't flatline. They got stratified. I mean, they were not flat for the working class as a whole. They did increase roughly along with the rate of increase in GDP. It just was as a share. It did not go down. What happened was there was a lot of stratification, so it was felt differently, and so that matters, not because it matters for the people on the bottom strata, but rather it's not a matter of the wages not being there that causing the crisis. And the people who say that the wages, the people who in this country, the people who say the wages flatline, are progressive Democrats who call themselves Marxists, and they cook the numbers. But the fact is there was a stratification of wages and not a flattening. So go ahead.
Okay. Markets turn into monopolies, right? I mean, this is why I use Microsoft Office. It's a crap software. It breaks down, and they've been at it for 40 years, and it breaks down every week, if not every day. So this is what monopolies get away with, right? They turn out shitty products. They drive wages down. They have market dominance, or they cartelize the market, and then they also financialize because they want those continued profits, right? So we know all of these things. It's just kind of grade school political economy, but the piece that I didn't get to, which I think is important. Pardon me if it's not for you, but during the same period, of this neoliberal, turn, we saw the prison industrial complex increase sevenfold, right?
Mm-hmm.
And those are interconnected phenomena. So during the same period, once again, during the same period for China, the working class saw its wages increase by eightfold, and they feel it. I mean, they can literally sense that the country was building commonwealth, and that their lives are demonstrably better. This is why when the US goes in and tries to do a poll trying to demonize the government, they come back with reports saying that the Chinese support their government 90 to 95%. I mean, the trust in the government and the direction the government is taking them is off the charts. So that's one thing. The second thing is the Chinese party, the Communist Party for China, is the agent of change. That's 90 million people, the vast majority of whom are workers. But coming back to the prison industrial complex, the US incarcerates people at the highest rate in the world, and it is tied to the suppression of the working class. When you do this kind of neoliberal turn, you need to be able to discipline people who won't go along with the program. You're going to get two types of people. You're going to get people who fall through the cracks, and you're going to get people who rebel against the system. For the people who fall through the cracks, you are going to have a little bit of charity, but not too much. And that's why you have a 1,700% increase in the nonprofit industrial complex since 1974. And at the same time, you are going to have people who just will not fit with the system, and they have to be disciplined. And that's why you see this massive increase in incarceration, 700%, 2.2 million, give or take, right? Plus another 6 million in some kind of carceral judicial no man's land. So simply the fact is that by the age of 23, the adult American in the United States, about 33% have a criminal record. I mean, it's astounding. And the US, of course, has 25% of the world's prisoners, and it has 33% of all the women prisoners. 1/3 of all the women incarcerated in the world are incarcerated in the United States. So you have this carceral state, and that carceral state goes hand in hand with a neoliberal state that needs to discipline the working class and keep them under very, very tight control. Okay, so for example, the United States incarcerates people at probably about 6, maybe 7 times the rate of China. These are all important data points. I mean, we can talk in the abstract about the working class and having the right to organize, but what I'm interested in, the concrete goods, the rough material concrete goods that make your life livable and that allow you the capacity to think and to be critical and to be reflective, and eventually, to have the higher ideals. But until you have that kind of basic understand of material reality, if you don't have that, then you're talking about abstract rights, abstract freedoms, and negative freedoms, negative rights. And that's not how I envisage the world, and that's not how I see my activism. And that's why, this is, it's my background and upbringing. But I think I have a very different position from you.
Yeah. Would you call yourself a socialist?
I'm not big on labels, but I believe that socialism is what societies should aspire to. And
when you say the word socialist, how do you think of it? What does it mean to you?
That's a long, complex working out. But certainly, I think it involves notions of equality, of agency, of distribution, etc. Certainly, it goes against most of the things that we see in the global north.
Well, KJ, thank you for putting up with me today. I enjoyed talking to you. I thought it was a very fruitful conversation. I know I got all, every American, there's a little bit of an asshole. And I know I expressed that side of my Americanness.
Not at all. It was an absolute pleasure. And as you can see, I'm no shrinking violet. But what I do regret is that we didn't get to the real issue, which I thought that we would discuss, which is that the United States wants to take down China. It's actively moving towards kinetic war with China, and that war will go nuclear because the US can't beat China on conventional terms. And once again, my argument is that the US feels the need to take down China because it doesn't see it as capitalist. It doesn't see it as absorbable into the capitalist system. It sees it as a challenge. And that's why we're relating.
Would you be interested in coming back in a week or so and talking to maybe myself and there's an author that we've published named Chris Catrone about the upcoming conflict with China?
I want to say yes, but I have to check my calendar. But let's say that I will definitely make a good attempt.
Sometime in the future, before the election. How about, can we say before the election?
Let's aim for that, and that's predicated on the idea that there is an election, right?
Yeah, that's right. If you enjoyed this conversation, please do consider supporting us on Patreon. Our patrons help to make sure that Sublation Media can continue to provide interviews, videos, books, and articles that are critical of the left from the left. If you are tired of remaining stuck within bourgeois ideologies and politics, help us sublate them both.